Chinese President Xi Jinping met via video link with EU leaders on April the 1st. This was the first such meeting in 2 years. President Xi said China and Europe must work together to build a bridge of friendship and cooperation across the Eurasian continent, foster a China-EU partnership for peace, growth, reform and civilization, and forge a China-EU comprehensive strategic partnership of greater global influence. China's vision remains unchanged. The EU has sent mixed signals to China, according to their statements after the meeting and tweets. It pressures China to choose between Russia and Europe while acknowledging the need to cooperate between the two sides on climate change and COVID-19, for instance. So how do European businesses feel about all these? I'm pleased to be joined by Joerg Wuttke, President of the EU Chamber of Commerce in China, who has spent almost 3 decades here in China. Welcome, Joerg, to this special edition of The Point. It's always good to have you. Joerg, do you hear me?
Yes, very well. Thank you for inviting me.
Good morning. Good morning. So I want to start by asking you your reading of the messages of how successful or unsuccessful this meeting has been between Chinese President Xi Jinping and the two EU leaders, Mr. Charles Michel and Madam Ursula von der Leyen.
Well, I was in close touch with both and their teams before, and it was clear that Europe came in with low expectations, but I think for them it was very important to actually relay messages to the president, as well as a couple of hours before to the prime minister. So expectations were not high, but I think the fact that there was a direct exchange is very vital. And you can see there's no communique, there was very sparse language, that nothing really in concrete was achieved. Again, I think there was a mismatch of priorities, certainly for President Xi. The Omicron crisis, particularly in Shanghai, was number one, and then secondly, rising unemployment, given the tech crackdown last year, as well as the service sector being hit. And so Ukraine is a geopolitical faraway discussion point for him. For us, it's number one, because we have 4 million Ukrainians already spilling over our border. For us, it is next door. It's not a cold war, it's a hot war. But given circumstances, I think listening to each other was what actually was the major achievement. Understanding possibly is better, even if you might disagree.
Sure, there are disagreements, and we can tell, for instance, and very publicly on Twitter, there have been a series of tweets by Ms. von der Leyen, which are actually quite mixed. She talked about there must be respect for international law and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. She says China has a special responsibility, which China does not deny. But she also goes on to say that China's reputation is at stake. She pointed out that daily China-EU trade that's at stake is $2 billion US versus China-Russia trade, which stands something like $330 million US. She also says we continue to cooperate constructively on climate change and in the fight against COVID-19. So as I said, mixed messages. But on the other hand, she also used very harsh languages in the eyes of the Chinese. For instance, she says that important issues remain and China must. She gave a must-do list for China, such as stopping its unjustified trade measures against Lithuania, lift sanctions against members of European Parliament, address global concerns of human or labor rights, especially in Xinjiang, and improve access and conditions for EU companies in its market. So it sounds like, okay, we have different priorities, but the tone is really harsh, not just in the eyes of the Chinese leadership or people, but also for observers around the world. Wuttke, how can you help us understand what exactly is the EU trying to achieve here?
Well, you have to keep in mind, again, for citizens in Germany, France, and Spain, the Ukraine war is around the corner. The Poles have 500,000 of refugees in their own borders. So for them, actually, the language from Beijing matters. The fact that it's not a conflict but a war is something that Europeans noticed. And of course, the kind of language coming out of Chinese social media is not very helpful. So basically, perception among the Europeans is that China is standing behind Russia, and also not just in words, but also in deeds. And I have been trying very hard last week in order to relay the message that China has been following the sanctions since 2014, since the Crimea annexation, as well as given the experience with Huawei, Chinese banks and companies have been extremely diligent about fulfilling the sanctions. So I said there's a divergence between deeds, sanctions being kept by China, and words where China is definitely extremely seen as on the same side as Russia. And of course, with all the atrocities going on, all of a sudden people back home associate China with supporting this, which of course
But
is questionable. But yeah, so in a way,
there's a
it's
there's a
divergence.
distinction, yeah, there's a distinction between Chinese government position and what's being said on the social media. Sometimes it's very difficult to control what people say, right? And sometimes there are all kinds of information. So is that nuance being reminded, let's say, for the readers in the West?
I think there is. I think again the awareness among politicians is there, but again how it gets across in the public perception. I mean, you read the likes of Global Times, and of course there the language is robust for Russia, and there's very little empathy going on. Again, for many in China, it's geopolitics. It's the U.S. and NATO behind it. But we look at myself. I'm married to a Russian citizen. My daughter-in-law is Ukrainian, and we had a hard time getting her grandma out of Kiev. Her grandfather is stuck in Dnipropetrovsk, hit by many Russian missiles. For us, it is very, very personal. And I think that really doesn't come across of what it means to the average European. And so there is a real divergence. And again, we have to watch out that we don't become victims of our own language and still maintain some sort of language in order to cope with each other. Lithuania is something definitely that could have been resolved. I don't know where the blame lies, but Lithuania, the supply chain within the European Union for European companies is a severe thing. It's not a bilateral thing for us between Lithuania and China. It is more than that. And of course, human rights is always hotly debated. And market access, again, that's my turf. We have always lots of recommendations. But again, at the same time, we have to not only come to the table with carrots, with sticks, but also with carrots.
Yes. That's why I want to have you on the show. I want you to be able to tell not just international audience, but also potentially to the Chinese people who are listening, even the policymakers. What do you think has worked, and what do you think has not worked, and what is workable? Because if you look at the statistics, both from multiple sources, from EU, from Germany, from the US, a great majority of companies, foreign companies in China, are by and large optimistic about staying here in China because they see opportunity, they see profits, Joerg. Is that what you can share with us as well, or there are more nuances we need to know?
Well, the European Chamber is going to come up with a survey in June, and I can tell you now already that last year was very important to us. Business was good. And then again, with the expectations as China has a very low GDP per capita, that China will grow for decades to come. And we want to be part of it, hence the lobbying to have more market access. But at the same time, of course, the impact of the Ukraine war is tangible on European companies, but frankly also Chinese companies. Commodity prices exploded, energy prices went up like crazy. The Belt and Road, the train between China and Europe has been interrupted. All of that is reflected in a recent survey by the German Chamber. 48% say that actually they have a negative impact. And of course, again, discussions in our publicity back home has an impact on our headquarters. I can see a lot of meetings where actually the staff here is trying to outline that we should hang in there with China. So it also depends on China to look into their own language. But again, we are here for China in China. But at the same time, of course, Ukraine war has an impact, but the much bigger impact at the time here now is Omicron, the supply chain. So in a way, we are really dealing with a very complex pattern of challenges that we didn't foresee
Right.
about a year ago.
I follow your social media tweets, and I know you pay a very close attention to what China is doing to fight COVID-19. And I come across this flash survey about the impact of Ukraine and Omicron on European business here in China. And I can tell that companies' logistics and warehousing and their supply chains are almost half say completely disrupted or even severely impacted by the current situation in China. So there's a dynamic zero COVID policy, which means that we cannot achieve zero cases, but we will try to suppress it as much as possible, sometimes at a very high cost. So, Joerg, do you have any feasible recommendations? Because you've lived here for 30 years, and you also know that COVID-19 have claimed millions of lives around the world. China doesn't want that, definitely.
Rightfully so. I mean, again, we had 2 years of a very successful zero rate, basically, whereas the world was in turmoil. Of course, now the problem is the world goes back to normal. In my own country, yesterday, Bayern Munich was playing soccer in front of 75,000 people, and in most
But the
countries in Northern
hospitality
Europe,
rate also gone up considerably, Joerg. And in China, we don't have that kind of medical facility, healthcare system. That is the problem.
Yeah, but again, I think we have now reached herd immunity in Europe, and hence the traveling is back, the meetings are back. It's pretty much nobody cares about anymore about high cases. You just stay at home. And China hasn't been there. China doesn't have the vaccine preparing this. And frankly, the good news is they had no cases. But if you don't have cases, you don't have herd immunity.
But
But
we
I'm
have
very encouraged.
vaccines. But we have
Well, you don't
vaccines.
have vaccines that are possibly able to challenge this, and that's why I
And
guess
if you look at
that the leadership.
if you look at the numbers coming out of Hong Kong, I'm sorry to interrupt you because time is really limited. If
Yeah.
you look at the numbers coming out of Hong Kong, vaccines, both Chinese and Moderna, Sinovac, I mean, both of these prove effective. The great majority of people who are vaccinated are protected, and those, especially older population, who died, unfortunately, are those who have not been vaccinated, neither by Sinovac nor Moderna.
Well, the same as in Europe. Most people in the ICU and the hospitals, I mean, we have much reduced numbers, of course, are mostly unvaccinated people. But again, the efficacy rate of mRNA is clearly proven to be much higher. And that's why I'm encouraged, as I met a couple of Chinese leaders recently, that they are studying very intensely the Singapore model, meaning Singapore has mRNA as a booster. They have Sinopharm and Sinovac as 1 and 2 shots. Again, the kind of staying at home when you are feeling ill is something that eases the system, the kind of less stress on the
That's
public
what's being done.
social network.
That's already a step taken, right? This is recommended that for people
No,
who
no, no,
don't.
no. China is studying Singapore model because that's the most efficient one. That's around the corner, and China's not there. If you look into the Shanghai situation, it's far away from that one, and average people are very unhappy about it. But again, China has the ability of acting fast. mRNA is not a drug which is far away. You can just produce it in Shanghai. And again, staying at home is vital. We have these shocking cases of kids being separated from parents, which is unnecessary. 4 kids in a bed and 20 nurses looking after 250 children. In Singapore, they have found a model how to live with this. And I think China is able to move from zero COVID to that.
All right.
Because again, China is challenged right now because they have 150 million people that are very badly vaccinated, elderly people. And of course, China has to look after them. So it has to be a measured reopening.
Right, right. Well, I agree with the premise that we have to do it in a very measured way, safeguarding people's lives while not disrupting economy, international trade and businesses at the same time. But the story about children being separated, that has already been clarified. It was a scene taken out of the context. So I suggest people go to whatever sources whatever ways they can to find the authorities' clarification about that. The point about Singapore, it's probably a case to study, but China is still very different. The kind of older people population, the kind of public health facility, the kind of mentality. Because when in China, when elderly people die, who are they going to blame? Are they going to blame themselves? Are they going to blame the hospitals? Are they going to blame the government? And when you have 1.4 billion people, times that by 0.001%, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of people potentially dying out of this. Is that the kind of price we want for the economy? But on the other hand, you have to feed people. You have to, so that is the, you know, the real big question, and we have that discussion all the time. But I think it's good to have you on the show, and I think it's good that we discuss this for everybody to hear and to think about. Thank you so much, Joerg. That's all the time we have.
Thank you.
Thank you. Joerg, President of the EU Chamber of Commerce here in China.